Welcome to the creepy chef's kitchen, where fear is always on the menu. Tonight's special, stories seasoned with scares and garnished with goosebumps. Smash subscribe and ring that bell. It's your ticket to our midnight buffet of horror. Now, let's dig in. The nightmares are served.
Although it doesn't seem like it, this happened quite a while back, probably over 10 years ago. I was in the later years of high school and was home alone. My parents were at a wedding that required them to stay at a hotel, and my brother worked the night shift. At that time, my family lived in a very well-known East Coast city in a blue-collar neighborhood that was starting to take a nosedive. As a teenager, I was a bit of a loner. I wasn't a nerd or anything. I was a big dude who had friends and went on dates, but I'm a natural introvert, so I cherished the rare alone time that I got. This weekend, I was looking forward to engaging in my normal empty house routine. Play some PlayStation on the big screen TV, then order a late takeout dinner, pizza or Chinese, and pig out while watching some Dragon Ball Z. Then around 2 a.m., fall asleep on the couch with my old dog, Sissel. Cecil was a beagle who was as old as the hills and had been in our family for about 8 years. He was quiet and peaceful and spent his time begging for food and sleeping. Unlike most beagles, Cecil never howled or barked. He was more than content to rest his head on your lap and spend the night there. Anyway, back to the story. It's approximately 1 a.m. I had just finished the last slice of pizza and was dozing off on the couch when I hear a bang coming from the back alleyway. I didn't think much of it. Anyone who has lived in a city knows noises happen at all moments of the night. Cecil's head popped up off my lap and the hair on his back stood up. He was always a bit skittish, so I calmed him down and started dozing off again. Not more than 2 minutes later, I hear another bang, and Cecil did something I never seen him do before. He leapt off the couch and ran like the wind towards the door, leading to the basement, barking and growling like a dog twice his size. The look on his face reminded me of a German Shepherd K9 unit. I'd never seen him like that before, which got my adrenaline pumping. Through the dog's barking, I can now make out a persistent banging. There was a seldom-used door in the basement that led to our back alleyway. It was old and rusted and was hard to open even with a key, and it made a lot of noise. I suddenly realized that someone was trying to break into my house through my basement door. Quick little bit of context for anyone who hasn't lived in a bad neighborhood. If someone tries to get into your house and moves on after they realize the door is locked, they want your stuff. If someone is persistently trying to get into your house despite the door being locked, well, they want you. Knowing this, I rush upstairs to grab the heavy wood baseball bat that I keep under my bed for situations like this. Then, I head down to my basement. I probably should have run, but I was a macho teenager with a tough guy complex, and plus I had nowhere to go. While I'm heading down the stairs to my basement, Cecil blows past me with the speed and aggression of a dog half his age. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice say, "Oh fuck," and the banging stopped. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with a bat in hand. My brother came home that morning, and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to take a look, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting in my house, but old Cecil scared him off. I'm pretty sure that lazy, fat old dog saved my life. When I tell this story to people, they dismiss his actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do. But when I tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life, you can take that to the bank. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that door was going to give. A few years back, we had to have him put down because he just had no will to live anymore. Before the injection, I got a moment alone with him. I thanked him one last time for his friendship, the light, and for what he did that night. At this point, I was a grown man with a wife and kids. I'm convinced none of that would have happened without old Cecil. Thanks, pal. I miss ya. Back around 1992, I was in high school. At that time, I was a sophomore, and unlike most of my friends in school, I didn't work the typical high school jobs like McDonald's, Taco Bell, some retail job in the mall, or work at the local grocery store. I was very good with my hands and worked jobs like construction, demolition, flooring, and auto mechanics. All of my contacts paid me under the table since I started working on some of these jobs at 14. It was beneficial for both of us as I was only called in when needed, and I was the guy willing to work only evenings and weekends. One of my contacts worked on remodeling projects at restaurants, bars, retail shops, and typical commercial projects that we could only work after hours. Like I said, that worked out for both of us because I went to school and would sometimes work after school or weekends. For this one contact, it wasn't uncommon for him to leave me alone at a site and have a list of things for me to do alone, mostly demolition work. I did this while the other crew was doing the installation or remodeling work. I was the kid, but had their respect because I did what I was supposed to do and did the work of a man without complaints. I got paid well, and in one night I could make more than my friends did working all week at McDonald's. This one instance, I got a call from the guy I worked for, and he said he had a project for me, and if I could work the following Saturday. I said, yeah, sure. He said to be sure to bring food and lots to drink as there was nothing nearby. I used to have a small cooler and would fill it with drinks like Cokes, Gatorade, or whatever, plus chips and a couple of sandwiches. Back then, I could eat a whole pizza by myself and burn it all off. He picked me up that Saturday morning as I didn't have a car or license yet, so he would pick me up and drive me to sites for work and leave me alone there. I rarely worked with his other crews as they were the more skilled labor guys. I was just the tear-out kid. Here is the part that was my major downfall to this story. I didn't pay attention to where we were going. I was too busy talking to him, and I think we were talking about cars. You see, at the time, my goal was to save up enough money to buy an old muscle car and rebuild it. It took a long time to arrive at the site. As we drove up, it was in the middle of nowhere. Now, you may not think California has places like this, but back in the early 1990s, out in the Mojave Desert, yes, it was big plots of land and homes more than a few city blocks apart. I knew we left the highway and went down a few other two-lane highways for a long distance. I remember he asked me about my drinks, and he pulled out a brand new jug of water that he had in his truck that looked like it had been there a while and told me to take it with me just in case. He said that the water to the house I would be working at was off. As we pull up to the property, he is in a hurry to drop off tools and get to another work site, so I hurry up and help him with things like breaker bars, shovels, pry bar, hammer, broom, several big trash bins, and a small tool bag that I often had with me. He tells me that he will be back to pick me up at about 5 to 6 p.m. as there is no electricity to this site either. Plus, it should only take me until then to do what I needed to do. That was always his way of saying, I am only paying you until this time, so you better get everything done by then. It was never too outrageous, and we always had a good understanding of time and tasks. He drove away, and I am at this property all alone. I walk into the house, it's mostly empty. My job was to remove all remaining furniture, contents, and appliances. Remove all the flooring, gut the kitchen and bathrooms, and remove all of the wood paneling. This project was going to be like what we now call a flip. They were going to fix it up and sell it. Almost immediately, I get kind of spooked by the place. It was very odd. Now, mind you, I am used to being on sites alone, working all night. This was the daytime on a Saturday, and it was bright outside. However, the house was old, dark, musty, and kind of cool. The kind of cool that gives you goosebumps. To add to the spook factor of the house, let me describe what I remember about it. Imagine walking back in time to the 1960s or earlier. Dark green carpet that looked like matted down broccoli, pine wood everywhere that had a darker stain to it. The wood paneling wasn't the kind used in the 1980s, sheet paneling, but actual board paneling, tongue and groove. Old window curtains that all looked like someone's grandma made them. An avocado green sink, stovetop, oven, and the stuff that was left behind, like old furniture and a closet full of old stuffed animals that looked to be about 30 years old. The style of this house was like an old Western ranch, as there were wagon wheels inside and outside the house. I had an old battery-powered radio but could only get a few stations. I was just happy for the noise. I started removing all the junk from the house, and as I normally did on a project, if there wasn't a dumpster on site, I made a trash pile. I tore up all the flooring next. To my delight, everything seemed to come up with ease, and it was rip, cut, and toss. Took a big demo hammer to the kitchen and tore it apart in less than an hour. I ended up using that big jug of water that my boss had given me to wash my hands and face periodically. But by late noon, as most who know the desert, the dryness also starts to take moisture from you, especially if you are working in it. So by late afternoon, I was down to my last drink, and I had already eaten everything I brought. No worries, I thought. The guys should be here in a couple of hours to pick me up. As the time gets closer for them to arrive, I am all done with my tasks. I even sweep the entire place, and it is now ready for the rehab crew to get to work making this place look modern. The time of year I was out here, it wasn't a typical hot desert day. But you know, in the desert, as soon as the sun goes down, it starts to cool rapidly. I had a flannel shirt, but that wasn't enough, and it was starting to get dark. This was the time before cell phones were common. There was no electricity, water, or phone service to the house. I climbed up to get on top of the roof of the house to get a better look to see if I could see something in the distance. What looked like miles down, I saw a smaller road that this dirt road led to, and a few homes, but those homes were all dark. My first thought was to hike down to a neighbor's house and ask them to use the phone. The nearest house had no one home, and this home also looked abandoned. If you remember, the early 90s was the start of a decline in the economy and recession, so it wasn't uncommon for a lot of foreclosed homes in attractive homes. A lot of those I worked on at that time. I started to think about my options as darkness fast approached. 1, to stay at the house until morning. 2, to hike with what little water I had a few miles in the dark Mojave night. 3, wait until early morning and hike out of there to some sort of civilization. It also suddenly occurred to me that no one knew where I was except my boss. I don't know if he told anyone else where I was, and certainly my family wouldn't miss me until maybe Sunday night. But I didn't even tell them I was going to work there. They knew me and how much I would work to save up for my car, so they never worried about me not coming home. As full darkness was all around me, it was amazing looking out at the night sky. Luckily for me, the moon was bright. I didn't have a flashlight or any way to make a fire. Even though I tried, I was going to make a small bonfire out of broken up construction debris as the temperatures started to fall, probably down to the low 40s. My only option was to go back inside the empty, creepy house that somehow seemed even creepier sitting alone in the dark. At about 8 p.m., the batteries on my radio, which was my only source of little light and noise, started to die. I grabbed an old wooden chair and sat in the living room of this house facing the door. I started to hear wind, odd noises, which I assumed were animals in the distance, and what sounded like leaves cracking under feet. I began to shiver from the cold, so I set off on trying to start a fire in the fireplace. Imagine Tom Hanks in Cast Away trying to start a fire. At least this kept my mind off my situation. Sitting in this living room next to the fireplace, the house seemed even darker than it should have. Mind you, in the daytime, the inside seemed dark, so with only the moonlight, I was pretty much sitting in complete darkness. My mind starts to play tricks on me. I am seeing shadows moving outside and inside the house. I am also starting to hear someone talking, like whispers or something. I get up from my chair and yell out, "Hello," and just as I do, I hear something fall from the other side of the house. I run over to the door and go outside again. At least in the moonlight, I can see better. But off in the distance, I hear noises and see movement, but can't make it out. I have my pile of tools by the edge of the house ready for when my boss picks me up, so I run over there and grab Big Daddy, my heavy pry bar that I used in demo. I was ready to defend myself against whoever or whatever was out there. I have to keep moving because my undershirt and flannel shirt weren't enough to keep me warm. The wind was also starting to pick up, and as far as I could see, there were no lights around me. I didn't want to try to make it up on the house again out of fear of falling in the dark, But I get up on top of the gate just to gain a little bit of altitude to see if I could spot some house lights or car lights nearby. My mind went to the stories that circled around at the time about how people would come up to the Mojave Desert and bury bodies, how there were Satanist groups out here, and how people would go missing for no reason out here. Every noise had me on edge, and every shadow had my heart pounding. Now, I knew no one was in that house, but I swear I would hear noises from inside. I huddled up on the front porch, looking in the living room window, expecting to see someone at any moment. By around 11 p.m., I look at my watch, thinking this is going to be a long night, as all this stuff only happened since it got dark. I don't know how I'm going to make it another 6 hours till daybreak. I start thinking the moment it gets to be daybreak, like the moment light starts to appear on the horizon, I am going to take the little water I had left and walk east. I knew going east, I would eventually make it somewhere. The dirt road I was off of led in that direction to a paved road. Closer to midnight, I am wide awake, my eyes fixed on the dirt road, thinking that any time now, a car would come down it, and maybe they can call for help for me. I remember casually turning to look back into the house, as all this time I keep hearing noises, but telling myself it might be a rat or some animal. I see a shadow of a person move from the kitchen down the hall. I jump up from sitting down and was like, that is not an animal, that is a human. I start backing my way out of the porch towards the pile and trip over debris, falling down on the ground. I get up but fall again. It was like something pushed me down, or it was my imagination, but all of a sudden, these bright lights are coming closer to me as I am laying on the ground. I jump up, and it's my boss. He is looking at me like, what the heck are you doing? I was just so glad to see him. I wasn't mad or anything, just asked him what happened. He said that he was sorry, but he thought the other crew was coming to get me, and they thought that he was coming, so no one actually came. He said it wasn't until later in the evening he asked the other crew leader about how far along I got that he realized I hadn't been picked up. Well, it took him almost 2 hours from where they were working to come get me. He felt really bad and told me he was going to pay me for the entire time I was out there. He also grabbed a can of Coke from his cooler and asked me if I was thirsty, and I drank that all in one gulp. Once we got back towards civilization, he went through a fast food drive-thru, and I ate like I had never eaten before. As he was driving me home, I asked him about the house. I told him how creepy it was. He said he didn't have any information on the house, only just what we were supposed to do. After that, I made sure to always keep extra batteries, a flashlight, and double the amount of liquid. I'm a graffiti artist. Before you judge me and say I'm a bad person or whatever, hear me out. I work on pieces in my city, Birmingham, in the United Kingdom. This happened a few weeks back. In the east side of the city, there is a canal that runs through the city, which is naturally full of tags and graffiti pieces, as it's a pretty quiet spot, but certain parts of it are visible to the public. It isn't easy to get down into the canal, but me and my friend, who's also into graffiti art, stumbled across a hidden ladder in a rundown car park on the back streets of the east side. We climbed down and realized we could walk the whole length of the canals. The water was pretty high up on this day, so we had to be careful. After about 30 minutes, we had painted over old, ruined pieces of graffiti, created new tags, and just generally had a good time. That's when we noticed the man standing on the other side of the water. At first, we were startled, throwing our cans back into my backpack and getting ready to run, as we thought we were about to get caught. However, the man just stood there. For a long while, I stood watching him as he stared lifelessly at us. It was pretty unnerving. The guy had to be about 40 years old, with gray hair, but he was standing so abnormally, his legs parted evenly, and his arms parted from his body at his sides. He didn't move, he just stared. I looked at my friend, who I'll call Josh for this story, and he looked back at me, by the looks unnerved. He decided to shout, "Hey," at the man, and then, "You all right, buddy?" At first, I thought this was a bad idea, but I just let it happen to see the man's reaction. Nothing. He just stood there like a mannequin. We were pretty shaken up, but we just said to walk further along the canal, and continue painting. About an hour later, we'd pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. We were now down to our last 2 cans of paint, so we were about to call it a day when I stepped back to see what we'd created. Just then, I noticed the same man from before, standing in the middle of the dirty canal, just staring lifelessly at us. I was so surprised to see him that I dropped my can into the canal and turned to face Josh. He noticed the man too. The man took the first step we'd seen all day, towards us. We dropped the cans and sprinted across the path back to the ladder. We pretty much ran all the way back to the city center where we caught our breath and tried to figure out what the hell we just experienced. So this story happened about 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it is the single most mind-boggling thing that I have ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened in mid-December. I am from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night. Like, if you get stuck outside, you will die kind of cold. That plus the snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house, and even immediately outside of it. Well, me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing video games. We were also the only ones home. The reason it was just us is because as my mother went from work straight to a bar to grab a few drinks with coworkers, so me and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family wine and live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I hear the door to the garage open and slam shut. I immediately go, "Oh shit," and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, "I thought you said your mom was supposed to be out all night?" "She was," I replied. I then heard a few heavy stomps and hear my mother yell out, "Meow Senboo? Anyone home?" I yell back up the stairs, "Yup, just hanging out in the basement." I hear a few more steps move from the garage door towards the stairs, and she yells out again, "Can you come help me with something? I need you up here." I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle, "Yup. Give me just a minute." Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" She yelled back in a more concerned, serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off of my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was a very open house to all family and friends. And the voice, it was just wrong, like it sounded like my mother's, but it was missing something that I couldn't out my finger on. Weirded out, I reply back, "Just Colton." After I yelled that back to her, I found a good place to hide the bottle and began walking up the steps to the next level. Now, as I was walking up the steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house and the slight electric twinge that something isn't right. When I got to the top of the steps, I look over to where the door to garage is, and also the kitchen right next to it, and it's black, pitch black, all if the lights were off and there was no moonlight shining through any windows. I walked over to the kitchen yelling out, "Mom, where are you?" There was no reply, just silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full needles and my adrenaline kicking in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. "What's wrong?" Colton says. "My mom's not home." I reply as fast as I can, looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking with her." I could see the confusion in his face. "There's no one home. We need to leave now." I took a few steps towards the back door that opens up to the yard, and then I see my dog shaking on the couch and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew that if we left, something would happen. "Are we leaving?" Colton said, still confused as all hell. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off. I'm going to call my mom and figure this out." I pull out my phone and call my mom. She picks up immediately. "Meow Senboo? What's going on?" She answers, "Mom, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level, and when I went up, you weren't there?" I said frantically, hoping that she was playing a joke. "No, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay?" "What do you mean you heard me?" I fill her in on the whole story, and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she got home. But before she did, you could hear something upstairs, not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air, like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next. And the word that I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quick as it came, like an overbearing predatory presence had just flown away. We still have never figured out what the hell was going on, and this is just one story of many unexplainable things that have happened this sex. But this is the easiest to write down and one that I was happy to have a witness. My mother has passed away now, and I have moved away to Arizona, but whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what had happened. I will never truly know what happened, but I know that whatever it was that had my mother's voice, it was evil, and it was hungry. This is my first post and is a true story. I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I'm probably 10 to 11 at this time. One night, I'm sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly wake up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent, so I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Click, 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 click. Finally, it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except for my mom and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice, "Help me, I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead, I barely said, "No," before this thing starts running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, it's coming," and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open, then slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that, and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. It freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mom still will not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me she's afraid it will know we're talking about it, and it will come back. This is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life. This is probably the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. I used to work overnight as a security guard at the local port. Usually, none of the port workers would stay overnight except for the safety official. I wouldn't be on the shift alone since the site has a radius of nearly 2 miles. Overnight, usually, there would be 3 guards, including me. Since the area was fairly big, there were different posts, but front gate was the main entrance area where all of the guards would be stationed overnight, since there was no need to put them in other posts due to the fact that there was no activity in the site at this time. The veteran guards that have been there for years would often say that the site was haunted, given the fact that there have been accidents and deaths that occurred in the area a long time ago. I was aware that people died there due to freak accidents, and I do believe in angels and demons since I'm actually a religious person, but I always thought that the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 to 6 nights out of the week, and for the first few weeks, I never really saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, except for maybe a few questionable creaks, and would see a few misplaced objects while doing my patrol rounds. But nothing too crazy. Just to describe the setting to you, this is a fairly big site, and on occasions when there were big projects being constructed at the port, the workers would sometimes stay overnight. Due to the fact that there were times where port workers were required to stay at the port for a few days, there's a gym in the site for their convenience. This gym is fairly old. In the gym, there's a sauna, weights, and even a racquetball court. If you don't know what a racquetball court is, it's similar to an indoor tennis court with thin plastered walls and thick glass doors. Usually on our patrol rounds, me and one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning back to the front gate. On one of those nights, me and Mike decided to hit a full workout instead of playing racquetball in the cage. This is around 2:30 a.m. And the entire building is so quiet that you can hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner is off, and so is everything else. The only thing that's running are the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we hear a loud thump. We crossed it off as nothing and continued working out. Then after a few more minutes, we heard the loud thump once more. At first, we thought it was our lieutenant, who could have been walking around, but then we radioed him and he gave us his location, which was front gate. We tried thinking logically about what could be making those thumps on the wall. They were coming from the court on the other side. We thought it was the air conditioner, but then we remembered that it was off, and even when it's switched on during the day, there's no reports of thumps coming from the air conditioner. After a few more minutes, the thumps started occurring one right after another. We were very creeped out at this point, but what we were about to witness still scares the absolute shit out of me to this day. We started to approach the other side of the gym to where the glass door was. We turned on the flashlight and aimed it towards the clear glass door, and I got chills all over my body, and I started tearing so much out of fear that I was about to cry. We saw one of the balls rolling slowly by itself inside the court, but there was no one in there. So that means the loud thumps were the balls mysteriously being tossed against the wall as if someone/something was playing inside the cage. We were both so confused and frightened by how this was really happening. We couldn't make sense of any of it. We were scared shitless, and we started yelling and running away because we knew that there was probably something evil toying with us right there. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked why we were tearing and running in a ridiculous manner. We told him what we witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. He then said, "That's why there's always guards that quit often. There's something evil in the area, and it's not the first time that something bad has happened here." He then showed us security footage of dark figures and shadows literally passing through the office areas and lights mysteriously switching on and off. To this day, I still get chills recounting my experience with my friends and family, and I'm even getting chills right now as I'm typing this. I had never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long in the job after that. The following is a story that took place quite a few years back now. However, it still baffles me completely, and I'd like to share it here. I'm a teenager, and I've been in scouting/Boy Scouts for nearly all my life, and I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind that I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older and Amy only 1 year older than myself. We had been walking in deliberately the same direction as to not get lost and memorizing the surroundings as we went in order to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to return to the campsite. That's the initial panic set it. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non-existent in the first place, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction, whilst shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it into two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple regatta outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated confused that we'd only been gone 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long, and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we'd entered an area that the concept of time didn't apply to. I believe in the paranormal. However, this was so unlike anything I've heard or experienced before. It literally was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. I'm a girl, and this happened when I was 20 in the early 2000s. People used landlines, and cell phones were not unlimited. This happened in a town about an hour away from Sacramento. My friend was house sitting for a family that her family was friends with from church. She was to house sit in the country just outside of town for a week. They had animals like cats, rabbits, a donkey, and a horse. The family also had dogs too, but the family took the dogs with them. My friend was in charge of feeding the animals and watching the place. She didn't have to get the mail daily because they had this metal lockbox-style mailbox down their long driveway. They didn't have any neighbors for miles, just fields of alfalfa, cattle, and corn. So I guess the lockbox was for safety. Towards the end of the week, she asked if I wanted to spend the night and keep her company. And I thought it sounded fun. I had moved out of my aunt and uncle's and gotten my own apartment, so I told her I'd pick her up on the way there after I got out of work. We got there around 9:30 p.m., grabbing dinner on the way. We went into the barn first thing and fed the animals. It was late for their dinner, and they made their hunger known with their animal noises. We made sure they had water, then went inside. The house was this big ranch-style house. Single story, the living room was to the left as you walked into the home. There was a long hallway directly to the right of the entrance that led to where the bathroom and bedrooms were. Straight ahead was a dining area, and to the left of that was the kitchen entrance and a patio door. They did not have an open floor plan. In the kitchen, on the opposite side, was also a long hall that had several doors. My friend explained that the wife ran a daycare center out of the house. These rooms were play areas for the kids she took care of. We didn't bother going over there because we had no interest. We watched some TV, ate our leftovers, and talked about people we knew. As it got later, she turned on the house alarm and said she didn't like sleeping in other people's beds, so she had been sleeping on the couch, then offered it to me. She would sleep on one of the two huge recliners that reclined so far back it was almost flat. The chairs were really comfortable, so I just said I'd take the chair. I went and laid back in a chair with my blanket. We turned off the TV and were talking for maybe 20 minutes in the dark when the motion sensor floodlights started shining through the window, lighting up the room. Now, I really have no idea why people in the country think it's okay not to have curtains or blinds, because to me, that's insane. We both got quiet, and Amanda says, maybe it was one of the cats? Then we start hearing gravel crunch, like a person walking across gravel in the parking area outside. My chair was closest to the window, and I slid carefully down to the floor, clutching the stupid blanket the whole time. The floodlight timed out, and my friend slid to the floor too. We laid on our stomachs in the dark, not knowing what to do for a minute, when we heard a loud bang, and all of a sudden the house alarm started blaring, and the floodlights turned on again. It was so loud we covered our ears, and I started to panic. I swear I have never been so close to peeing my pants in my life. I began crawling towards the keypad for the security because I've seen the commercials. There's a button you push, and a person responds to you in case of an emergency, or at least sends the police. The main screen says patio 1 of 2 open. Amanda starts to cry a little and hits the call assistance button on the pad, and nothing happens. There's no assistance. I ask her where the phone is, and she says there's a phone in the kitchen and one in the parents' room down the hall. So our choices are to go to the kitchen, past the windows, and next to one of the patio doors, or to go down the hall to the parents' room and use the phone there. I asked her where the other patio is, and she said it was in the daycare part of the house. It was an easy decision. We go inside the parents' room, and it's pitch black. I ask her where the phone is, and she says, I think we have to turn on a light. I really don't want to turn on a light, but have no choice. I don't have a flashlight, and I didn't bring my cell because I had limited minutes. It was a simpler time, and Amanda didn't even get her own cell until after this happened. She turns on the light, and we start looking around the room. Not only did these people not have curtains on any window, but they didn't even have closet doors. We see a golf club leaning against the wall by the bed. They probably have it instead of a baseball bat, which is what I had next to my bed at home. We figure if we hit someone with it, it's going to leave a mark. She grabs it, and we continue our search for the phone. Looking at the obvious places, we find a cordless phone stand minus the actual phone. The alarm is still raging. We have a light on, and the person who opened the patio door is bound to notice is all I'm thinking at this point. She asks, should we use the locate phone button? I look at her and respond, yeah, if you want some strange guy coming in here with it and asking us if we were looking for something. I am getting mad that I'm scared and in this situation. Standing there knowing that we have to go to the kitchen, the house alarm stops. It gets country quiet. If you've lived in the country, you know what I'm talking about. There isn't another golf club for me to grab, so I make her go out first, flipping every light on and keeping the doors we pass in the hall closed. We double check the security panel and it still says patio open. Hit the call button and it still doesn't work. Double checking the front door is locked, we start for the kitchen. I tell her we have to check the patio near the kitchen, and I grab a big knife that wasn't even close to being sharp from the kitchen. We check the patio door near the kitchen and it's locked. We turn on all the lights and grab the phone and dial 911. The phone isn't a cordless phone. It's one of the old ones with a cord attached on a wall. My friend is on the phone with a dispatcher telling her what happened, and I hear a whistle coming from outside the kitchen window. The thing people don't think about, because I didn't in my thinking that safety was turning on the lights, is while you have the reflection of the inside on the window, people on the outside have a clear view of you, unless you press your face against the window. I hear the whistle again. It sounds like someone trying to get someone else's attention kind of whistle. But I don't see anything outside, and I'm not pressing my face to the window to see if I'm the person they're whistling for. My friend is still talking to the dispatcher and is crying and saying she doesn't have the address to the house. She hands me the phone and I say, hello? The dispatcher lady, who sounds annoyed, tells me she needs an address to send police to. I ask that she trace the call, and she says something like, "You're house sitting and you don't even know where you're at." Scared, angry, and overwhelmed, I hand the phone back to Amanda and start looking for something with an address in the kitchen. I'm looking in the junk drawer, on the counter, on the refrigerator, fully keeping an eye down the hall that has the daycare rooms, knowing that on the other side of one of those doors is a patio door that was opened. Amanda tells the lady that she doesn't pick up the mail because of their lockbox, and then a few seconds later removes the phone from her ear and stares at me with a blank face. I ask her if they're tracing the call because I cannot find anything with an address. Amanda says low, she said, "I hope the police find you in time," and hung up the phone. I was so scared and angry at the same time. We knew that there were people outside. We knew that the patio door to the daycare area was opened. We did not know what to do. We stood in the kitchen silent for what seemed like forever, but was probably 1 minute. I picked up the phone and dialed 411. I told Amanda that they would have the number to the police department. As calmly as I could, I explained what was happening to us. I included the 911 dispatcher and said we really needed the phone number of the town's police department. When we heard a huge metal bang outside the kitchen window by the patio door. It sounded like someone dropped something metal and heavy. Amanda started crying, and I couldn't hold in my fear anymore and started crying too. Whoever was outside was going to break open that patio door, is what I'm thinking. The 411 operator said they were connecting us and would stay on the line with us after getting pissed at the 911 dispatcher on our behalf. A police officer answered the phone, and the 411 operator started explaining what was happening to the police. Then they were asked to disconnect once we had an established connection. The police asked a few questions, and we heard the whistle again outside, and floodlights all around the house turned on again. I was too scared to look outside, and we had never turned on the patio light because we had to walk across the patio window to get to the switch. We told the policeman on the phone about the whistle, and he said that there should be several policemen showing up shortly and to stay on the phone. We were outside the town limits and knew it might take a few minutes. Having an officer on the phone made me feel a little better, but I was still really scared. He told us that the police arrived and were coming up the drive. The policeman said to put down the phone and open the door, so I did. What I saw was a police pickup truck with spotlights flashing into the pastures that ran along both sides of the drive. Two officers, not with handguns but with shotguns, were walking slowly beside the truck as it came up the long drive. 4 officers approached the house asking us our names. One went to the phone and said they were here and hung up the phone. They ordered us to stay in the dining room and began searching the house. One by one, they returned. The last one came back in through the patio door by the kitchen. He said he searched the barn and the horse scared him, and the horse also looked spooked. He asked what other animals were in the barn. They told us they didn't find anyone and that the daycare patio was not locked. There was, however, a broom handle in the track to prevent it from being opened too far. I looked at the patio door that the officer entered in and saw there was not a broom handle in that one, then felt dumb because he just walked through it. They lectured Amanda about not knowing the address of the house she was supposed to be responsible for and other stuff I don't remember. After finishing statements, they said they'd stick around and look more, and if we wanted to leave, we could. They could lock the bottom lock, but not activate the alarm, and we were cool with that. We were out of there so fast. We got into my car and went to her mom's. So, mentally exhausted, we fell asleep, and I went to my office job the next morning. She said she really didn't want to go back to the house, but she had to feed the animals their breakfast. Her mom told her to take her sisters, and she did. That afternoon, she called me at work. She was really nervous and began telling me that when they went into the house, there were footprints in poop on the carpet. I said it was probably the cop that checked the barn. She said that she didn't know or pay attention. Also, she said that when they went into the barn to feed and water the animals in the morning, someone had tied all the rabbits' legs together in their hutches. They had 10 rabbits the kids used for 4-H. Amanda then continues to say there was a note with the word lucky scribbled on the back of a pizza coupon she thought came from the refrigerator door because the flyer was missing a coupon. It took a while for them to untie the rabbit's legs, and Amanda asked her mom to find someone else from their church to finish the house sitting. She wasn't going back. She also told the officer what she came back to, but no one was ever caught, and the police never called either of us to update us. So, as I've said before, I spent a lot of my childhood in the woodland forest, both behind and to the left of my grandparents' house. I wouldn't always go into them alone. In fact, more often than not, I had my younger cousin, we'll call him Ben, with me on my misadventures. One in particular really stands out to me. My cousin Ben and I would, most of the time, just wander around the first mile of the forest and look for ponds, animal bones, weird fungi, normal young boy stuff. Well, one year in school, I got a backpack with a little built-in compass on the top. It only really worked if you set it flat on the ground, but hey, it was still a working compass, and that meant we could go even further into the woods without fear of getting lost. So one day, Ben and I met at the middle of the levee and started our journey. We got about 3 or 4 miles in when we happened upon a clearing, which isn't necessarily uncommon, but this one was. The first thing we noticed is that it was a nearly perfect rectangle, save one corner that was kind of dented in from the trees, and about the size of half a football field. The next thing we noticed was the grass. It was completely different there, like that thick, super dark green grass you see on rich people's lawns, not the thin, scraggly stuff that grew everywhere else, or even the kind some people purposely grew to attract deer to hunt. I asked my cousin if he knew anybody that lived out this far, thinking it might have been someone's hunting ground or backyard or something. He wasn't sure, so we walked the entire perimeter to try and find a trail or back road. There was nothing like that, just the same thorns and bushes like from where we stumbled from. It was like the whole field was just dropped there. Now, if you've been in the woods long enough, you know that a patch of grass, both longer and brighter than the rest, usually is a result of a lot of shit or a dead carcass. Well, in the near center of the field, there was indeed a patch of grass both longer and brighter. We investigated and found it was the latter, at least what was left of it. A long spine with no ribs or skull sat in the middle of the patch. My guess is it was a cow or horse, seeing as how both are prevalent in the farmlands. The odd thing about it was that the spine was completely straight, no curve, no slouch, just flat and straight. We decided we were more creeped than curious at that point and wanted to head home. I knew which direction we came from, but I was excited to use the compass, so I set it on the ground. 3 things struck me almost simultaneously. First, the spine was pointing the exact direction we came from. Secondly, I couldn't hear a single bird, squirrel, or insect. The third was my compass had a crack down the middle. I don't know if you have seen the backpack I'm talking about, but the glass part on the compass is super thick. It would have taken a hammer and determination to crack it, much more than just a simple walk through the woods. Being the big brave cousin I was, I decided not to mention it to Ben, seeing as how he was already a bedwetter. I slung on my backpack with confidence and headed toward home. The next few years, we decided on several occasions to make the journey back out there. The only problem is we never found it again. We met at the same place every time, headed in the same direction, and walked what we always felt was more than the same distance. We never once found that clearing again. My brother told me about how he and my other cousin, older bro of Ben, had the same thing happen to them, but with a lean-to full of broken glass and bungee cord. I've read up on some stories of people out west finding towns in the desert and never being able to find them again, even though they took the exact same roads. I can only assume we experienced the same phenomenon. Not necessarily scary, but fascinating nonetheless. I'd love to hear any of y'all's experience about the same happening to you. This happened about 13 years ago when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks. 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl. And they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left off of the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly this was, stepped over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as my imagination. And in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What would we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing. And I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically, a doozy-doo. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the fuck is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy shit!" I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling away in closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding, and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states, yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of, "The woods." That really happened, right? It most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 in the morning and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and if you have a story to share, send it to creepychefmedia@gmail.com. Stay spooky.